Michelle.
Daniel.
OG
OG
Rose.
Rose.
And Jacob Kishere.
Jacob Kishere is visiting us. So Jacob
Yes.
is like in our house on the couch. It's pretty remarkable.
Amazing.
There he is.
Here I am.
So we've been having a blast, and our children have attacked him on many occasions. So he's literally the first day Jacob's here, Reed falls asleep on his lap.
Yep.
Like he just falls asleep. He's like straight out. It was hilarious. But we were talking about a number of things, and something that came up is how with all technologies there's trade-offs. There's always trade-offs, there's always goods and bads. We really don't want to think in terms of, if we invent the internet it's either all good or it's all bad. Because really, if you just can say, it's all good or it's all bad, you actually don't have to think about it, because it's either all good or it's all bad. There's no thinking, there's no judgment, there's no discernment, there's no decision making. And so I think there's always a temptation to treat things as either all one or the other. And then, Neil Postman talks about the television as a Faustian bargain in amusing ourselves to death. And what we were going through and talking about, what are the trade-offs of Dialogos, which I thought was a fascinating topic. And I think it's really important to think because, it's very tempting for people to think of the trade-offs 10 years in the future, when all the consequences come in of, say, social media, for example. Now everyone's talking about the trade-offs, but probably we would have done a lot of good if we would have thought of the trade-offs earlier. But we want to think about them now. And I think actually if we start thinking what are some of the trade-offs of Dialogos, or what are some of the things that we need to be aware of, then that might save us some trouble down the line. So I thought it was a really interesting topic. So Jacob, what were some of the things that were coming up for you when you brought up that wonderful topic of the trade-offs of Dialogos? Because I thought it was really, really interesting.
Yeah, super down to dive into that. First and foremost, it's close to 11 p.m. here, so we are really going in on it. And we've been talking a lot about context building today as well, so it's good to build that in.
Nice.
And surely it will inform the quality of the conversation. So, yeah, the thing that came to me with immediacy when we're talking was that the trade-off of Dialogos might be the loss of shit-talking.
Yeah.
Which is a super rich ground of relationship, and also a basis of knowing the substance of somebody, particularly a male-to-male thing.
Yeah.
But there's probably female equivalents that I'm not totally aware of. But a relationship where it's quite distinct, because in Dialogos we're kind of trying to exalt the highest virtue. We're trying to communicate and show up with the best quality of ourselves in a way, and the best quality of listening, the best quality of presence, and giving space for people's feelings, giving space for things to emerge. And that's very different to the shit talk mode, which is I'm not going to wait for emergence to happen. I'm going to slap you in the face with a joke.
Yeah.
Or a very funny insult. Or I'm just going to dredge up an old joke that we've been doing for years and hit you with it again and again in different ways throughout the day, because that's just how we roll. And so it's almost it leads me into a larger inquiry that's been coming up for me, which is about consciousness and how much contemporary spiritual discourse, of which I've been a participant, is about elevating consciousness, raising consciousness, becoming more conscious. This is very prevalent right now. And what came for me is maybe actually this is an unquestioned axiom. Maybe I don't want to become more conscious. Maybe in some sense I do want to become less conscious, and there can be some virtue in that as well, especially in the context of art making, in which the creative flow and the wisdom is coming through the unconscious rather than the conscious. And I think Alex Ebert's stuff on this has been really useful. But yeah, it's those kind of libidinal drives and the more of the shadowy energies and the darkness that might produce great humor, all of that is not really about being super conscious all the time.
No, I really like what you're getting at. I can think of all the times on the wrestling team where the way that the wrestlers would greet one another is like, how you doing, you a-hole? Fine, you dick. You know, like it's kind of back and forth. But funny enough, like the friends who you could kind of call a-holes was actually like a deeper relationship. Like it meant there was like a stronger bond there. And actually the inability to say, throw someone onto the mat and kind of beat the crap out of them, what the inability to do that was a sign of a kind of deficit, actually. Like the ability to kind of like fight with people was actually a sign of a stronger relationship. And it's interesting to think, I think we're in the age, there's something here about knowing how to move between modes. So for example, people who know like this kind of like wrestling grit kind of interaction, it becomes easy to then moralize that as the only way to relate and all you need. And then people who do dialogos, it becomes easy to moralize and say that's all we need higher consciousness. The trick seems to be the ability, and I think it has something to do with humility, to know that there are different modes for different ways, and you have to become able to move in and out of those different modes. And that's a very skillful thing. That's a very delicate, difficult thing. It's a kind of like you have to know how to weave these different practices together, when and where. Because, you know, dialogos with someone who you can't call an a-hole is quite weak, right? Like if you can't, you know, the people you're doing dialogos with can't take being hit in the head with a duct tape wrapped sword, and we'll let everyone guess if that's based on something, then there's a weakness in that relationship, right? But then at the same time, if you can't talk philosophy with your wrestlers, if they act like that's not necessary, that's not needed, that's just bookish, there's a deficit there as well. So it's interesting here because we've been talking, and then I'll pass it on, like we've been talking so much about the shared context and how society now doesn't give you givens, it doesn't give you a shared intelligibility, where, say, if everyone's Christian, you just know the people around you share the intelligibility of the worldview of Christianity, and you can interact with them just from that shared background. Well, where backgrounds are missing, the only thing that really fills the void, if you will, tends to be skills, tends to be navigation, the ability to navigate between people and to create that shared context or that shared understanding that isn't given. You have to create it for yourself. And that would require, say, the ability to move between modes. If you're, say, all Christian and Jesus is like, take up your cross, okay, there's some grit, there's some like crap talking right there, like get over it, take up your cross, right? You have to get over it. But if you don't have that Christian framework, how do you understand the need for sometimes to take up your cross, sometimes to put up the good fight, maybe deal with someone calling you an a-hole and that actually being something you laugh about as like a sign of brotherhood, but then also move into conscious thinking. Like you have to like create the map of when you navigate between them as opposed to rely on maybe a religious calendar, holidays or practices or rituals and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I was thinking about how interesting it is to reach that place with somebody where you feel very comfortable to joke with them, tease them, you know, have like those jabs at each other that are just playful, you know. And it's like a there's an ease in that, like there's a comfort there. But it could look kind of like, oh, that's sort of mean, or why'd you say that? But I think there is something like, and we talked a little bit about this at the net when we were talking about comedy and humor, but there is something where you have reached kind of a new level in that relationship, I think, when you can get it with each other. You can joke and play, and you've learned each other's humor to the place where it's so unique, because, you know, humor, and like there's things that by and large most people would like laugh at, but there is a very unique particularity that people have in their, like, what their range of humor is, or their sensitivities to things, like in terms of what they might be more resonant with, being funny or not. And the manner of joking with somebody will kind of change per relationship. But the fact that you can joke with the person is a very cool place to be at with them, because there is something that just feels like part of the nature of that type of way of talking is like just overtly, how do I put this? It's like intentionally making up mistakes and stuff with each other. Like you're intentionally kind of doing what you're not supposed to do, and yet you can like jive with that, and you can, flow with that. And I think there's something really like you're at ease with. You're at ease. It's just you feel like, you can feel a sense of feeling relaxed with that person. I mean, I think that's like, I definitely feel that dynamic. And I think what's interesting is like, how do you achieve that with, because a lot of like, at least for us, I mean, a lot of the Dialogos spaces and such are through the internet,
Sure.
like that, as we've known them with that term,
Right.
Sure, like Daniel would have his time at the diner with older gentlemen or like elders who you kind of learn from and listen to. And that's another type of Dialogos actually, but in the way that maybe it's practiced in like the online philosophical circles, it does make me wonder like if it's how to get to that place of that ease with humor, because there's less implicit rules. Like and I have felt this sometimes through the internet, like talking with somebody through the internet, because you're kind of like, is this too much? Is this not enough? Or is this like, am I pushing it? Or will they get I'm joking?
Yeah.
And you don't have the implicit background of, either the shared space where you can kind of joke but then smile, and they see you're just joking. I do feel like there's something about the phenomenological experience with somebody that really enhances that or advances that, where you can get there quicker, I think. But I think it's definitely possible with people you maybe even only know online until you get a chance to meet in person. But it does take a lot of trial and error, and sometimes like that might mean the person maybe misunderstood, or maybe you misunderstood, but you have to like extend a kind of grace and trust until you get there. But I do wonder if it's a bit more challenging on the internet, because a lot of the implicit rules of conversation and engagement, and all of the facial expressions and the sort of like the gestures that you can do in person are not there. They're not there. You have to basically just build it from the ground up with that person, and you're working with a lot of handicaps, but you do have what you do have in your favor is like the explicit, which it's like enough of the explicit communication then develops this kind of like background of the implicit that you have with that person. But again, shift that over to another person you just happen to speak with in the internet landscape, and it might be a little bit different. So that's a little bit of my ideas on the topic so far.
Yeah, no, that's really stirring. And if I may just throw in a few pieces, and hopefully I'm not jumping to the end of the conversation here, but I feel like what we may be looking toward is a Dialogos that integrates the shit talking effectively.
Sure.
Like the higher form of Dialogos is one that includes the subtle shifting that you're kind of describing, Daniel, between the modes, but to be conscious, like somehow like conscious that we're in the unconscious shit-talking mode, but to somehow still remember that there's other modes outside of that, and to be able to fluidly move into those as appropriate as well. So that felt kind of pertinent to that. And then in regards to like the online communities, I do think it really varies person to person how quickly you can get there.
Yeah.
But it may be the case that the quality of comportment that we've talked about with Dialogos, of the kind of openness and non-judgment and so on, those things are maybe conducive to the space in which the risk can be taken without the presumption of, miscommunication leading to things getting shut down. So it could be that Dialogos could become a springboard foundation for more punchy and different kinds of riskier communications.
No, it's very interesting because my mind, there's a few things. One, is it the case that then Dialogos is actually, there's an incentive to do Dialogos to hide the lack of a shared, that dynamic that you're describing, Michelle, so then it's like, let's not venture into giving each other a hard time or joking with one another, because that would actually unveil the impoverishment of online interaction, lacking the full phenomenological experience that's needed to do the giving each other a hard time and it not being insulted. So there might be a kind of way where Dialogos, like if you just emphasize that, you don't have to face that reality, and you can kind of hide from the lack, and you could say, oh, this is the same or different thing, like as lived phenomenological experience. So there is a possibility of a certain kind of distraction in Dialogos from the shared background, like you're describing, Michelle, of which the topic of giving each other a hard time or joking around or that kind of jesting or that, throwing each other on the wrestling mat brings out, right? So it's interesting, too, because I think there's also something about we should be skeptical. Like, if we look at Shakespeare, and the jester is basically the source of wisdom. Like, comedy, like we're talking at the Nat, like, is the source of wisdom comes from the jester. If there is not a space in Dialogos for the jesting or the hard time or the, that kind of stuff, then there's probably a source of wisdom that's lacking. And it's probably the case that Dialogos is more likely to fall into confirmation bias or bubbles or things like that. And people would go, well, the whole point of Dialogos is that it emerges to something that is not in a bubble. Well, the problem with being in a bubble is you wouldn't know you're in a bubble if you're in a bubble, right? And we should always be skeptical of dialogue that doesn't allow something to remind it not to take itself too seriously.
Right.
And that's one of the things, like one of the things that's so good about the giving each other a hard time is precisely that it's a mechanism. So, a lot of people talk about toxic masculinity. It actually is a mechanism of fighting toxic masculinity. People would see it as an expression of toxic masculinity, but actually it's a kind of fighting it. It's like, oh, you think you're all big and bad? No, you're a piece of crap. Like, who do you think? This is you can't use that axe. There's just like, what the heck? It's actually like fighting you, and actually it's kind of challenging you to rise to the occasion, because there's a big difference between, in my experience, there's a big difference between men giving each other a hard time and men demeaning one another.
Yeah.
Being able to tell that difference is very different. Toxic masculinity is demeaning one another. Giving each other a hard time is like checking your ego. Yeah. And it checks your ego in a men. It actually then is a testament to the friendship, because what does a friend do? Help you check your ego. A friend keeps you humble. A friend also, though, kind of prods you on to do something that you may not do on your own, but actually are capable of, like cutting down that tree, that then because your friend prods you on, you find out you could cut down the tree, because your friend's like, you can't cut that tree down. You're like, hey, I can't cut that tree down. Oh, yeah, no, you can't. Oh, really? And then you're cutting it down. It's like, oh, wait, I actually did. So then you, rise to the occasion, but you also find that you can only rise to the occasion with action, not because of your ego. You have to cut the tree down. You can't just say you're big and bad or whatever. You got to cut the tree down. You got to win the wrestling match. You've got to. And here, then, I guess I'll relate, and then I'll pass it on. This also, if there's something about Dialogos here needing the integration with this kind of grit, you could say, it does make me think of thymos, like Limburg will talk about it, the Stoa, or Raymond will talk about, like in the tripartite soul classically. You needed logos, you needed eros, but you also needed thymos. And thymos is like the warrior spirit kind of. It's not just the warrior spirit, but this kind of like.
Does he call it thumos?
Thumos
also?
Is thymos, thumos. People pronounce it incorrectly, so thumos. So there's something about thumos that without people die, like humans require thumos. And there's something about the giving each other a hard time and the grit that speaks to that thumos. And here's the thing, if Dialogos gets in the way of that, or does not allow the thymos, as I call it thymos, to come out, then Dialogos is actually not addressing the full human soul. So it must allow that coming through of the thymos. And I think also this is where people will say, well, you've always got to make space for the real and the con. Like dialogos or even circling is another phrase people will use. Like circling must always then not be a mechanism of avoiding the real. It always has to be like aware of the real, and you have to be using dialogos to gather wisdom that you use for the real, or to cut down the tree, or to engage in thymos, or the messiness of relations. And that, I do think, is when you start speaking to a higher wisdom. That seems to be really important here, kind of bringing of thymos, you know, if we were to throw out a bunch of categories, stuff like thymos, the real of Lacan, circling dialogos, there seems to be something here where these things all need to come together. If, you know, I'm not saying necessarily there's a given practice where you put all these things together, but there at least needs to be an awareness that you cannot leave one of these behind. Like, you need all of these different things. Like just to give defense to Dialogos, I saw lots of like athletes and men in different things who would give each other a hard time and engage in thymos, but they didn't meet with older elders to speak at a diner. You lose something if you don't have those Dialogos experiences, if you don't have the reading of books, if you don't have the ability to like follow a conversation for hours and hours and sees where it goes. Like, there is a deep loss of the soul. You know, there's a deep loss in the soul without that. But it can be tempting if you're good, you know, if you enjoy sitting with old men in a diner, it can be tempting to think that you don't need to do wrestling. Because look, we're, you know, engaging with the truth of reality, but you actually lose something really important.
Could you briefly explicate the real?
The real in Lacan is basically a way to sum it up as anything that thoughts desire. Like, you know, Cadell gives the example of you have a plan to get to your hotel at 8 o'clock this evening, but your plane is late. Then you miss your train, and the taxi driver's charging you just as much as the plane ticket was. And this is the real. Like, this is the reality that comes through and thwarts all of your plans, and it gets in the way of what you desire. The real is also things like, oh, you think that once you get this job, then you'll be happy, and you get the job and you're not happy. It's not what you thought it was. The real is how reality is such a thing that always thwarts your desire. Like, the real always unveils that your desire never fulfills itself, and it never actually achieves its object. But it's very, very hard to accept that, because what Lacan will call the imaginary and the symbolic order, they're basically in the business of trying to convince you that the real doesn't exist, like, that the real can be mediated and it can be avoided. And so we've basically created economies and politics and whatever that try to convince people you don't have to worry about the real. But the real always comes up eventually. You always eventually are alone with yourself. You always have to face that. And so then the point would be, it would be extremely important not to fall into the temptation of, say, using the liminal web or using Dialogos to avoid the real. Because eventually, in fact, the key would be to use wisdom practices to integrate with the real, to accept the real, and to think the real, and to be wiser about the real. That seems to be this higher order thing that seems to be very important.
Thank you.
Really quick, you kind of mentioned about speaking with the older men at the diner, for example, and feeling like, okay, well, I don't really need to do wrestling, but that wouldn't be, you know, correct. Ultimately,
yes.
It would be good to be in dialectic with those two things, you know, those spheres of engagement. Do you think sports is a, I won't say the only way, but like the most ripe way to engage in that type of joking and kind of humbling banter, but at least between like men? What do you think it's usually through sports? Does it have to be? If not, what are other avenues for it? Can it just like arise from just a friendship? Like, do you think the sports element is pretty key there? I mean, what do you think?
I can speak to that because I wasn't really engaged in sports and found an awful lot of this in a social fraternity. There were a lot of characteristics to that experience which were really interesting. One of them was the fact that it was a group of men with a shared purpose together, which was somewhat in rivalrous competition with other groups of men also doing their own thing, with a little bit of ritual initiation getting involved to join that group. So some sense of exclusivity, some sense of travail and difficulty together to get in. And then in that context, like a shared mission, like, oh, we want to be the best We want to throw the best parties. We want to be ultimate. I mean, a lot of it just works off of what's already there. Like, we want to be respected by the girls. We want the girls to want to come to our parties. So all of that created a context in which that could occur.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
I think it's good. I don't think it necessarily has to be sports. It seems like it has some sort of shared something, though. Some kind of shared mission, some sort of shared team, some sort of shared objective. Because if you start giving someone a hard time that doesn't share in your goals, well, then they're just going to walk away.
Right.
But if they share in your goals, then they know that the giving of a hard time has a purpose of achieving that goal. That it can't be personal.
Bingo.
Now, I think maybe sports might be uniquely situated for this, because if the person crosses the line, you can beat the crap out of them. There's like a natural correcting mechanism, because there is this question of how do you know when you're going too far if you're giving someone a hard time. How do you tell? It's not always easy. You can sense it. But in sports, if you go too far, well, we can settle that real quick. We can deal with that. So it might have a way of, it will also teach you to, like, don't speak unless you're ready to go, too, right? Like, if you're not ready to go on the mat, then keep your mouth shut, right? Like, if you give someone a hard time and they take it personally, okay, you ready to go? And then what's funny, though, maybe they shouldn't take it personally. Arguably they're not responding correctly by taking it personally. They should know that it's just part of the banter. But if they do, and you fight it out, well, you tend to shake hands afterwards, and it's like nothing happened, precisely because you were able to fight and then leave it on the mat. That's where sports can then provide maybe a corrective that perhaps other avenues don't. But I'm not quick to say that.
Right.
Simply because you can have this kind of check and balance there. Or now, definitely it happens on the work site. When you're unloading trucks, people are freaking bantering, giving each other a hard time left and right. But everyone knows you share the mission of unloading the trucks. There's a shared mission. So you see this on work sites. I do think, I'd be curious how y'all think of this. I do think it becomes more difficult to engage in this giving one another a hard time in non-manual settings, manual work settings. The reason I say that is because if you're giving each other a hard time and you're filling a cooler, like, you fill the cooler, you can tell you filled the cooler. Okay, we achieved the goal, so we're done, right? And the banter has kind of achieved the goal. But in white-collar work, I wonder if there might be a difference, because you can always answer another email. You can always do another meeting. So there's no, like, hard finish point in work, and so there's not a clear mission. Like, it's not so clear what the objective isn't as hard. And when the objective isn't as hard, just like filling the cooler is given by the cooler, well, then the giving each other a hard time, bantering, making fun of one another and whatever is contained to a very clear objective. And so when the objective's completed, then no one takes anything personal because we finished the objective. But when objectives in the workplace become more metric-based, more optimization, more subjective, then it may be more difficult for banter to, like as we're describing it, to not become personal. And then you get hurt by it more easily. Because you're also not sweating and like using your muscle. Like, it feels like you're putting your brain into things. And so when people like give you banter and you put your brain into it, it feels like they're attacking yourself more directly. I'd be curious what comes up for you on that, because I do wonder if the changing job landscape basically has made it more difficult for people to scratch that itch of crap talking with one another. And so they don't do that, and actually something deep and profound is lost. Like, the ability to give one another a hard time seems like it's actually a very powerful gluing mechanism. And if people's work life or their kind of communal life or whatever doesn't allow those opportunities, because it's too easy for the banter to feel personal, because there's not a clear mission. We were saying that you need a clear mission. I think it's easier to have a clear mission in a blue collar job than in a white collar job. And so it makes it more difficult to scratch that itch. I'd be curious what y'all think of that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on when I think of like moving a carpet or something. There is just something so rooted and practical, and it's also just kind of conducive to be shared hands-on with a physical object, to banter around the project.
Yeah, to around the project.
I'm doing that, and also like think of the the way those guys often spend their working days in like one of those trucks with like 3 abreast in the truck, so you're kind of crammed in and you're going somewhere, and there's an intimacy to that as well potentially. So with regards to more white collar, I don't really speak to it because my experience of white collar workplaces has been relatively limited. But as you were describing it, it is becoming more apparent to me. I'm just kind of like going through my mind of like the relationships that I've formed in the context of Dialogos in like 2020 and 2021. How many of those really had a strong shit-talking basis? And not many.
Right.
Like in hindsight, it does feel like it was a real missing piece or shortcoming, those relationships, and some of them were very deep relationships. Really profound connections with people, but something about the culture around the Dialogos and the associated things, the men's groups and the game B and so on, missed out that piece. And whether that's, there's a fear, there's some underlying fear of like we're going to upset one another, or whether it's that we like many of us have come from backgrounds where that's more normal, that's more the MO, and like people have gone into game B mode as like a journey away from, or like a they've undergone a deconstruction of whatever mode they were in before, and now they're playing this new mode, and the shit talking has been associated with the previous mode. And I've had a number of instances like this where I've like, met people in the context of game B and associated things, and the conversation has tended to areas of their background which were much more like game A. Like I met with this guy who was in the podcasting space but used to be a rapper, and it didn't seem to me that his whole life with the rap had been coming through in his life in circling, and so they're very different, and how he's showing up there was very different. And he noted, like, because our conversation had tended much more into his background and all of these topics, and that's what I was interested in, it was a very different conversation than if we had just shown up and done circling together and had this interaction in that mode. And so there's potentially a lot of like integration that's available for us, because it's not necessarily like that we've been deprived of it. It's that we are in relatively normative contexts where there's more of that, I think, and then for whatever reason we go on an exile, we go on a journey, intellectually, spiritually, we find community with other people. And then the way that we play that, the way that we participate in that is different. And it's not necessarily integrated the game A,
right,
and the shit talk, and the common life reality.
So it's very interesting because as we're talking, there's a number of people. I think of like Alexander Bard, I think of Thomas Hammerich, I think of Dark Renaissance, who I think speak to this problem. They're like, well, yeah, you have this kind of circling in the game B, and we got to get the real in there. I know they had the conversation on the Stoa, and there's like this idea of getting the grit, and you don't really worry about civility, right? You just kind of speak, and maybe it's insulting, but that's the real, and that's how we make a strong relationship and have a strong conversation. And I'm very interested now because there's a part of me that's extremely sympathetic to that, but then there's another part of me that thinks Zach Stein, he wrote that piece on the necessity of civility, Forrest Landry. They're like basically dialogue that doesn't have etiquette is doomed. That seems to be true. There's a lot of times conversations can be destroyed by the dismissiveness that you might see in people who are more of the dark Renaissance side. But then in the game B side, you can, I think, like you're saying, there can be this kind of like, maybe it's not anti-fragile, you could say. Maybe there's a kind of like, there's conscious raising, but the conscious raising may lack a certain kind of depth you can only get from grit that you need to maybe survive the real or get through the hard times or to really be concrete.
Mm-hmm.
So right here it's almost like we want gritty conscious raising or something, or a kind of gritty wisdom. I'm almost tempted, a phrase I've been thinking about is real wisdom, like Lacan's the real plus wisdom, real wisdom I've been thinking about. But the main thing is I'm very curious, and I'd be curious what comes up for y'all. Like, it seems to me that what we're describing when we talk about the giving each other a hard time, this kind of like bond that comes, between men, that doesn't seem quite the same as the dismissive, kind of insulting kind of stuff that you'll see in kind of some of the different online spaces and different things. So I'm curious on what you think, like the differences between those maybe.
Yes, so as far as I can tell, there's a qualitative difference in that there's a kind of disruptiveness that undermines the fabric of the space, and there's a kind that enriches the fabric of the space. And that's also, as we were speaking to earlier about these subtle differences, that's a subtle difference, and it's not necessarily one that can be codified or even captured at the level of what's said, but it's something you kind of know when you see it, when you listen to it, when you participate in it. You can sense, is this edginess, is this punchiness, is this directness, is this interruptiveness in service of the space, or rather, is it affording of more connection, or is it something that creates distance that actually undermines the possibility of a shared field, and thereby undermines the possibility of the emergence of shared wisdom or insight, which ultimately seems to require some degree of intimacy, intellectual intimacy, psychic intimacy, and a shared field of trust. But somebody can just be entertainingly or provocatively all over the place in a way that undermines that. And so it's just something you can sense when you're watching a master, when you're listening to somebody who's really, the depth is just there, and those, I believe it is possible to have that depth of connection and also to bring in that punchiness. But I don't have a huge number of examples in my head of people who do that. It's a rarefied kind of quality,
right?
And it does seem to also have like a class component to it. You talk a lot about the kind of white collar, blue collar distinction. I think it is being in touch with those cultural layers and being in touch with the real in that sense of like where you're from, even. Because a lot of people are from backgrounds that are, more working class or more like those parts of cities or wherever where that kind of stuff is just in the fabric of life. And so again, it's almost that like integration of people becoming spiritual, becoming philosophical, but how much of the root comes through of the common life, or where they come with their family and so on, which is often actually where they can kind of get in contact with that quality. So yeah, the intuition that's coming from me in this is that a lot of it's not like necessarily something that's unavailable to people that needs to be learned. It's rather just like there's been some departure either in themselves and their development from a place in life where this is already available, or simply the context of the dialogue is not really bringing that side in. But it can.
Well, it's interesting because a few things, like I'm thinking about people who are married who make like comments, like someone forgets something at the store and they say something like, oh, well, that's not the first time. You know, how that has a different character than on the workforce where you're trying to cut a tree and you're doing the axe and the limb will break and a guy shouts over at you, been missing the gym? There seems to be a difference in that. It's interesting, why is there a difference in that? Where the ones between the marriage couple can feel very hurtful. Where when a guy's cutting a tree and someone shouts over him, missing the gym, huh? It doesn't have the same kind of viciousness. Unless the person's insecure who's doing the tree, and then it would almost be like his fault for like snapping at the guy, right? So it's interesting that those seem similar but also quite different. And the question is like, what's the difference? Where maybe with the example of forgetting something at the store, there's nothing the person can do now because they're not at the store, and it's making them feel like they're being watched all the time, and the person's remembering they tend to forget something at the store. But when the guy is cutting the tree, he's there cutting the tree and he can keep cutting, and you're harassing him to motivate on, and it doesn't feel as personal because the problem is the tree. Whereas with the grocery, it's your memory, right? So, you know, I'm thinking about that white collar, blue collar, and the difficulty of bringing in the kind of punchiness so that it's not personal. And then the question is it possible online to have the punchiness, if we use that language, be like cutting the tree versus forgetting something at the grocery store? It's almost like in a lot of the online spaces, it's very difficult for it to not feel like a personal attack, or it's getting way of the unfolding of the dialogue, so it doesn't quite work. But then the intuition of the Dark Renaissance to be like, we got to bring this stuff in because it's lurking in the background, and if we don't, we're not real, is correct. But then the format does not allow the bringing in of it in that way, because it doesn't have the shared context. It doesn't have the shared kind of facticity that can kind of ground that expression of the libidinal energies in a manner that is constructive and strengthens the relationship, as it instead gets in the way of the relationship. Because I like what you were saying there, Jacob, and then I'll pass it on, is the difference between libidinal energy that enhances a relationship, like we're talking with the wrestlers or the fraternity, and the releasing of the libidinal energy that then destroys the dialogue because someone is being insulting and dismissive. Like, that distinction seems really important.
I do think there is a gender difference. Like, I think that you said the couple with the grocery example would, you know, more or less, like, obviously this not necessarily the case, but there can be like the power struggle between a more masculine and more feminine dynamic, because I'm thinking about like teasing and bantering and, you know, giving each other a hard time. I don't know if that's very common in female friendships, honestly. Like, I have a friend now who I met through like philosophical circles, and we banter, like her and I will, but for the most part that was not really a part of how I grew up in my own female relationships. Like, there was more, the playfulness would be more, like, me and my twin sister have an imaginary world, and like we'd like go into that, and we'd be characters, and we'd be making these scenes and stuff like that. But it'd never really be about giving each other a hard time. I don't know if that's just, you know, that could also be personality. You know, there are definitely different types of women out there and female types of relationships. So I guess I'm just trying to think of the equivalent for me when it comes to that with other females, because the whole point of the grocery list is that it's often again female energy and masculine energy, and that's why it just feels like a personal attack. Whereas maybe if it's like the same playful energy and the same type of play, then it can be taken as like motivation or a joke, or just like actually because of your bond. I'm trying to think about this, like, well, there's that whole, like, again, this is a trope, but men are shoulder to shoulder, women are face to face. This is like more of the, so in a way, if we're thinking about this just logistically, if they're kind of throwing out these jokes, it's almost like these little arrows, and they're just throwing them off, but they're obviously not going to hit each other because they're not facing each other. But with women, they're facing each other, so like it's harder to not take it like personal. Oh, you were kind of teasing me, or like you actually meant that, or whatever. And I don't know if that's just like sensitivity levels, or I don't know what, but I honestly didn't really grow up like knowing about this whole dynamic of like tough, like this sort of like
tough love, you could say.
Tough love, or like this sort of teasing love or joking love, I mean, I started to witness it, and I thought it was quite funny and amusing, honestly. And when I started to cultivate it myself in relationships, I was like, this is quite like enjoyable. Like there's something quite, like I was saying, that ease you feel.
Yeah.
There's something really radically relief about it. Like that's just really, it's hard to describe. It feels like this sort of no judgment zone, for lack of a better word for that.
Which is ironic because it seems like there's constant judgment.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's an interesting place of sort of like the paradox or the irony, but that's what makes it even more like robust, I think.
Well, it's worth considering also like the positionality, the spatiality of Zoom is always face to face.
Yeah.
So
that's a great point.
It's like unique in that sense that whatever group of guys are going to be constantly face to face.
Yeah.
So maybe that does evoke a need for less confrontational modes or less confrontative behavior, because you're in this like head and shoulders facing intimacy.
Indeed.
But I do think that we have to make space again for the possibility and perhaps reality that there are distinct behavioral and relational differences between men and women. And I know you qualified it when you said it, and I think it's reasonable to qualify it, but the qualification of it in this time is so large as to, it's like the qualification of it is this big, because we don't want to upset the subsets
right.
of people who don't fit in the generalization in such a way that actually hides a very large reality,
sure,
which is experientially true and very relevant and worth talking through.
Yeah.
And if my sister was working in a restaurant with all men, and she was loving it because she felt like there's not much drama, as she puts it.
Yeah.
She found it to be much more just banter with the boys,
exactly.
and the relational quality is very different. And she's had all friends that were girls and tons of drama. And there's a whole different social hierarchy amongst women, which can be very vicious. And just as violent as men are purported to be, women can be in status and relational sparring, and then the inverse of that is like this desire to create relational intimacy, kind of more early on potentially between women, whereas men it may not be the case. So these distinctions really matter, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was a great point. A lot of great points there. Like the idea that Zoom is face to face, so it inherently puts you in that kind of like, possibly more challenging dimension or like arena to do the whole banter and joking, because every example, like, or the ones that stood out to me were like with wrestling or with like cutting a tree. Like, these are all things you're doing. Like I know wrestling is like you're man to man. It's a very like man on man.
But it's a shoulder to shoulder thing.
But it's a shoulder to shoulder and things in that, yes, you're like doing a task, you know.
Yes.
Like you're doing something, you know. It's and also the whole thing is like you put the energy on one-on-one and like on the mat, like you are oppositional by the nature of like wrestling a man, right? Like that's where it is. It's nothing personal, right? It's just about your strength and you're seeing what you can do with that. Like, yeah, you're so I guess I'm just thinking, because like a lot of so yeah, that was an interesting point. Zoom is face to face, which I was saying is kind of a more feminine thing,
yeah,
versus the like man to man, shoulder to shoulder. And then also the idea that women can be much more drama prone. I think that's absolutely correct. And I wonder if it's almost like men are just more honest about like, hey, like, you know, we can all be crappy sometimes. We can be crappy to each other, but like we also know that at the end of the day, like none of that, like that's all just, we're just joking, and like we had that bond, or we're working together, we're gonna get the job done, you know. And so it's almost like, whereas women maybe are more like you know, like they're not gonna be as just outright about maybe their sort of feelings, or they're joking with each other because they don't want to like step on any toes, or they don't, but then they end up like, you know, really hurting each other because they weren't just kind of willing to sort of jokingly jab, you know. It's like they don't do the joking jabs as much, in my experience. So then they do, like, when the jab happens, it feels like it's like that jealousy, or the sense of like complete abandonment, or like the sense of, oh, I didn't, you know, are you, like there's real tensions of like, you know, being genuine friends together, and do you care about me, or why haven't you, you know, you, whatever, all of that stuff. Yeah, which is really fascinating.
Well, I mean, you know, there's a few things. First, there's an argument that women might tend toward the psychological, where the men kind of move it out of the psychological. So the funny thing, if I tell you you're an a-hole, it's not psychological. It's a fact. You know, I've told you what I think, and so there's nothing to like think about. It's just straight. But if I just look at you and smile after you drop after you show up late at work, you have to wonder if I think you're an a-hole. You know, where, you know, he's like, it's the veiled nature of the feminine.
Oh yeah, that's awful.
Yeah, and so the veiledness, yeah, that's right.
But it's also like part of feminine, like that can be like alluring about the feminine, is the veiled nature. But in relations and with this kind of, this very like kind of fraternal or friendship type of thing, it's like very difficult. The veiling is like very obscure, and it makes things very strange.
I mean, generally, you know, the masculine, we were talking on the porch, the trade-offs between depth and distance, where, you know, you need both. But if you have depth without distance, you don't go anywhere. But if you have distance without depth, you're shallow. So you have to have both. Generally, men are more distance, women are more depth. And the issue is that, you know, you obviously have to have both. The power of the veil is precisely to bring you into a depth, and that there's something here to see. But then the temptation is to use that allure to then punch them in the face when they're not paying attention. Where what the temptation of the man is to just leave you behind. You know, they just keep moving. They don't, you know, and they become shallow, really. So there's ditches on all these different sides, and it's what seems to be going on. So there's a few things. One of the things that you're seeing there is, I do think the masculine bantering or giving a hard time is a psychological ventilation system, and it sends certain signals. Like if I can banter, if I can jive with you, then I actually am saying to you, I trust you to be able to take the punches. Yeah. So I'm saying to you that I trust you, that you can handle this. And I'm saying that our relationship is so strong that we don't have to walk on eggshells. So I'm sending you signals. And I'm also telling you, indirectly, that if there's a problem, I'll tell you. Because, you know, I call you an a-hole. I beat you on the wrestling match. So if there's a problem, I'm going to tell you. So there's like a certain honesty that comes out. So it's like a psychological ventilation system. Where females, in not doing that, I think you do see a sort of the risk of that as a kind of pent-upness that then can explode, right? But that very pent-upness is why females are able to hold emotional depth, so they can hold relations, or they can hold networks in ways that men often forget or don't do so well. But the risk of that holding is that without the ventilation system, something might erupt forth. So basically what this would all suggest is the stakes of this conversation, because if Dialogos is somehow more feminine and it doesn't have a ventilation system, then it is very possible, and frankly maybe even inevitable, that something will build up underneath it that one day will burst forth and destroy all the liminal web spaces. That to me is what's probably lurking, is a build up. I think I hear a mouse running. A build up of kind of an unventilated something in the background that without a ventilation system, because basically what you're describing for me is a psychological ventilation system, a sort of psychological sort of establishing of a shared context that, hey, men have ways of creating shared context and like trust and different things. Now you could even maybe make an evolutionary argument where it's because if the men are going to go out and hunt, I need to know that you're not going to leave me behind, and so I can't have you wondering what's going on in my head. And you can't, we can't be wondering that, because we all have to be on the same page or we might die. There might be an evolutionary thing here. Whereas women, if they're going to be more in the gathering, then they have to be able to hold the depths of the community and keep together all the social capital and maintain all of these different relations, because otherwise that falls apart. So maybe there's a evolutionary explanation, I'm not sure. But the point would be, and then I'll pass it on, if the Dialogos and the circling and the liminal web do not have a ventilation system, then you probably have a bomb ticking. You probably have a bomb ticking behind the liminal web, and it will come forth, and then it will just turn into tribalism and go back. All the game it will just turn into game egg. We'll just fall back on the rivalist dynamics.
Well, what if somebody be like, well, there already is a ventilation system. It's called like DMs. It's called the side conversations that happen off recording or offline.
It could be, but also that's not the public face. And people, like, the public face doesn't have the ventilation system. Okay. And that, I mean, you're right, you could have that going on, but I would actually argue the DMs are probably making it worse, because people are actually speaking about the problems of the other side with the other people that are more already ideological aligned with them, and they're just getting more tribalized through the DMs, unfortunately.
Well, the other thing I was going to say, two more things. When you said about like the honesty of just being like, if I call you an a-hole, then like you just know it. But the funny thing is that the person calling their friend that they probably don't actually think their friend is that.
They don't mean it in a deep way.
Yeah, that's what's kind of funny about it, where it's like it's an honesty, but it's also like they don't really mean it.
Well, it's a weird thing, because there is a sense if they're saying it, then they feel it. Like, it's like you're late for work, yeah. Like, we need you here.
It's kind of like, mean it, but like you don't think like his character is.
Yeah, you don't question
such.
The character, but you also are expressing quite clearly you did something wrong. Like, or you can't cut the tree. What the frick is wrong with you? Cut the tree down. Like, there's an expression of you need to do better. But it's a kind of kind calling. It's a kind of like, you can do better than this. But it's not personal.
Like silly goose or something.
Well, it's almost... this is interesting, because it's like, if I say you can do better, then I actually am saying I believe in you.
Yeah.
Where a personal attack is like, you suck, and you can't do better. So there's like a difference between this you can do better, which the whole reason I'm telling you can do better is because I think you can do better.
Right.
And then a personal attack that is basically just saying that you're a waste of air or something. Yeah. There seems to be a difference there.
And there's like that whole, even just that way of talking, it's not like you're constantly calling your friend that. Like, there are times when you do and there are times when you don't. Like, it would really depend on kind of the situation and what just happened. But like, what could the liminal spaces look like with a ventilation system? How could that be envisioned or visioned at all? If we think about it, like, is there a way to see that happen? Like, if we just want to imagine a potential solution for it, what do you think? Okay, just really quick. I think sometimes puppet shows.
Brendan did that. Brendan and Lehman had a puppet show. It was great.
I love that.
Well, it was great.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just to get a little bit more playful in general. It doesn't have to be like, jumping straight to the whole like, you big jerk, but like it could kind of get there but it would just be like, maybe it's just to be a bit more playful in nature. Maybe. Or to incorporate that. It doesn't have to be the whole time being like just... But yeah, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, banter is playful, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And banter seems to be pretty essential to the health of any community, really. So that's the first thing that comes. The second one that's been bobbing around in my head throughout this conversation is the in-person meetups. That is the thing that kind of opens up those channels to some degree, and then that is then maintained digitally,
right?
And obviously the more nodes that are connected in those ways, then the more the network itself has that quality, because you've established that we've had a sword fight earlier
Yes,
today.
we did.
We couldn't do that online. And we can't undo it. I can't unsee what I've seen. I didn't get the opportunity to drive around in this guy's vintage car, and now I can make jokes about it. Even though I know he's got a much faster one in the garage. So
funny.
Those are two things. I think the art side of the philosophical community is probably another part. Because it provides channel for the ironic integration of all of those pieces.
Yeah, it's a good one too.
In regards to music and probably other things, you can give voice to those libidinal or dark or shadow aspects, and then get them out there.
Yeah. And
then they're kind of integrated more and shared with your community, and insofar as lots of people are doing that, then we're actually like populating the conscious space of the conversation with all these artifacts that are suffused with more fuller aspects of self. So
that's really good.
And meming is another way that we can do this. Like, I think the meme culture is essential and brilliant, and we can really roast each other and roast ourselves with memes very effectively.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because I was thinking about that. It's like another big thing today and it's just people posting kind of just crappy, like very speedily made memes that, but they're funny, or they resonate for a reason, but it's just like making fun of stuff, and it's funny because like you'll get people in like the comments being like, that's offensive, and so, but like then someone was like, the person was like joking, like it was a joke. But I think there's something there like that's really important that you brought up. I really like this idea of like also integrating the art, like bringing the art side into it, because I mean I know for sure like to hear your music and like it opens up a whole nother dimension of like knowing you more, and then kind of being able to see how like it just opens up a whole different, like completely different dimension of like knowing more about you, Jacob, and also of having you here with us. Like there is something that's just totally like I don't know, just kind of like level up. Like there's something that it does where you just feel kind of a totally different level of that relation itself,
right?
Or and like the ability to engage in like the serious but also the non-serious, which I think both are, you know, are very important, like we're talking about here. So yeah, those are good ideas.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And one more thing I just want to tag on is like having private spaces, semi-private spaces. Like the issue with the memes and YouTube and so on is like everything is everywhere.
Sure.
And the quality of those banter relationships and those shit-talking relationships is always contextually bounded and partially private.
Yeah.
But if the only context in which you're engaging is a recorded conversation, for example, the net is something that's recorded, this is a factor in the degree of, I don't know how much it's a factor for me, but for some people or for the relationality between people, we're comporting ourselves in accordance with how we want to do that more publicly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's in private that the more of the edge gets pushed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No, I think that's very, very good. I like everything you said. I definitely think I actually do think that basically if this problem is not addressed, the liminal web does have a ticking time bomb behind it that will explode. So addressing this issue is critical. And I think the first thing you said about private, like in-person meetups. So this is kind of the ways I think about it. I think right now some of the people in kind of the dark Renaissance sensibility have an intuition of this problem. They actually have an intuition of the lack of the real and the libidinal, and they're like, if this doesn't get in there, this is all fake, and it's not going to make any difference, and it's going to blow up. I think that intuition is completely correct. The way, though, some people in the Dark Renaissance go about it is to bring kind of an insulting, or not an insulting, but a more interruptive, a more aggressive kind of way of working in the Dialogos. I don't think that's correct. I don't think that actually accomplishes the goal. Like, the correct intuition of the Dark Renaissance needs to manifest in, we need to then have in-person meetup. But not just in-person meetups with people who agree with you, but from, if you're a Dark Renaissance, with Game B people. With people of the meta-modern sensibility, of whom you think are wrong or disagree with. Well, you need to meet with them in person. As you need to meet, you need to meet with other Dark Renaissance people, but that meeting in person seems really important, because that's where the kind of getting more edgy can be productive, but not destroying the performance. Because like you're saying, the net or conversations online, they are performances. They are performative. They are bringing forth a certain quality of thought. You're trying to help people who watch the videos have a better grasp on their life, or have mental models, or to think clearly, or to understand situations. They have a performative element, and in that you can get a bond with these people here that you're doing this emergent work with, but it also has a performative edge, which is actually good, because then if indeed the Zoom stuff is more, like you were saying, Michelle, feminine, then you need people to engage with that feminine side, or to engage in the ability of cultivating a space of Dialogos and emergence. However, if that's all you're doing, then there can be a risk there. There can be a lack of the real of fragility. So I think what the liminal web has to think is you can't do it all in one thing. You have to do multiple things. Like you're talking about creating art. That seems to be really important, but that's not something you do in, say, a net conversation. You're talking about like an in-person meetup. You're going to get qualities from an in-person meetup you can't get from the net. But then you can get something from the net that you can't get in an in-person meetup, because you can't have everyone at the net come to the house at the same time. The logistical challenges are too much, right? So that kind of conversation...
We're going to make it happen one day, Dan.
Yeah, no, well, that's true. We'll have the net retreat.
Sooner than you think.
Yeah, the net retreat. But that's idea, like, I feel like what can happen is people are like, we want to make it all fit in Dialogos conversation. No, you need to Dialogos in-person meetup, in the art, in like these like diversified portfolio. You would never do an investment strategy where you invest in like one freaking stock. Like you would invest in a multitude of things. And that, to me though, if we want to though kind of, so I agree with everything you're saying, Jacob. I really like that. And I think what I would also say is that if you want to engage in something that's more something a little closer within the Dialogos conversation, something a little closer to the banter. Banter's a good word. I think of Stevens at the end of Remains of the Day, where banter, he's talking about being more bantery and how that's important. I think what's required, although you can't maybe have the same degree of giving each other a hard time in Dialogos, precisely because it's inherently more feminine than masculine, as you're getting at, I think the proper thing is the return basically of wit. Like wit with Oscar Wilde, Yeats, that was kind of a Victorian notion, or Chesterton would be a great example of wit. Wit is a form of where you can take jabs or bring people a hard time or kind of frame people, or you'll see like in Parliament, like this kind of notion of rhetorical wit. That seems to be the correct thing, not this kind of harsh, insulting, interrupting, kind of putting each other down. That doesn't seem to work. Because because that only works if you're shoulder to shoulder. So what the appropriate form of that in a Dialogos format is probably wit.
Well, and it's funny how too, like, just the intent, like, it's interesting to think how the intention of the person shows up big time in how the teasing or the joking is delivered. Like, somebody can be harsh. It's usually like when they're trying to comment on whatever they just heard, say it's a lecture with the Q&A on Zoom or something. The person might be kind of afterwards kind of basically being like, I thought the whole presentation was kind of crap and I don't really agree with any of that. But the way that they are going about it is basically to make sure you know that. Not so much like, oh, well, hey, you didn't think of this thing, did you? Because like you're saying, and you already kind of touched on it, but it's like the joking that we're kind of talking about being important in a relationship actually speaks to the best of the other person. Yeah. We're like, I'm kind of teasing you because I'm trying to coax that out of you because I know you can handle it, and also you can rise to the occasion to take that jabbing and actually like say, oh no, I did think of that, and here's my answer. And so like the intention, it's funny how the intention there is different, right? Because the one person is just sort of like, honestly not being very like, how do I put this, they're not being very like thoughtful with their thoughtlessness or something like that. Like they're just kind of being reactive, whereas there's something more about like the liturgical structure of the relationship that is more like the responding, that even joking is kind of tactfully, even though it seems like not tactful because it seems like you're just kind of giving each other a hard time, but it's like there is something tactful about it because it's actually often geared toward conjuring, like getting the person to kind of admit something or show something or kind of speak to something. And I think that like you're right about Jacob, about like how like recorded things, anytime it's recorded, can make the dynamic feel different, right? And it is really important to have like some of the more private spaces for that banter, and that cultivation. Yeah,
that's important. The private space.
But I would say like with the net, because it's reoccurring, I think you do, especially for the people who come like frequently, like there does get to be a sort of mode where you vibe it out with certain people that you can sort of joke with them a little bit, and I think that's just time. It just takes some time and feeling it out, and that's what I was saying about the trial and error. But so you can see that even, you can see that it be afforded with things that are kind of like more intention. Again, back to the intention, like the intention of that investment and that time and that reoccurrence that then can, I think, repetition and that ease where you start to feel more comfortable with one another. You can see that start to come out a little bit more too, I think. But yeah, just some thoughts.
Well, I mean, I'll just note, I mean, the reoccurrent structure of the net is indeed intentional for that dynamic.
Yeah.
Like, where there's this struggle with Zoom where it by definition cannot escape having a performative element. But how do you lessen that as much as possible? The only way I could is the reoccurrence. The reoccurrence, and also you don't know who's going to be there. People, you don't know what you're going to talk about.
Like the whole idea of it too is like people can be there if they want to or not, and that's okay either way. And next week, hey, there's another chance if you want to be there.
Yeah, and
like
also,
nobody's forced to be there.
Yeah, and also too, like, how are these people going to meet one another other than like arranging a Zoom and there's a logistical challenge? But then, Hunter Coates is in the same conversation with Cadell and Javier and Chitan, right? Now they've all met, and they come from different sides of the internet. And otherwise, what is the chance of Hunter Coates, say, meeting all those people? Well, if you just have a space where people come and go and they run into each other, it affords connection between maybe people from metamodernism, maybe people from dark Renaissance. They're just going to run into each other. Whereas, here's the other trick. If you say, okay, well, we in Dark Renaissance are going to make a point to speak to metamodern, then there's all these questions of, should we do that? Maybe we're saying metamodern is good, and we're not even sure if we want to say it by even being willing to have the conversation. There's all these kind of existential questions of what you're saying by even choosing to host that conversation. Well, it just happened that some people showed up in the net. You know, it just kind of just happened. Yeah. So the design of the net is to try. You can never escape the performance problem, and in some respects, that's not necessarily bad.
Like you said, exactly.
You know, that's
like
not
there's
necessarily
something
bad.
to the fact of like actually having something
performative.
Yeah, and having
there's a virtue in being able
to say.
Like if we go back to the I was saying, like Chesterton or Witt or whatever, people walk you. You're going to a dinner party. You want to bring a certain performance, an aura, a certain sort of character that people are enjoying. You know, there's a goodness in that. The question is
absolutely.
how the question is how performance not turn into something fake.
Right, and how can you kind of do a bit of both, actually?
Yes.
Like you've got the performance, but you're also able to sort of engage in this sort of the slight play. Or
the relation.
Almost like too much of the real could be the loss of the performance, or to the detriment of the performance.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. Like the parliamentary style is very performative wit, and also if I think about like all the dinner parties depicted in Tolstoy, it's like that was part of the MO at the time, was to be able to entertain, even talking about politics or what have you. There's a performative aspect to it because the salons and the dialogue context was so core to society.
Yep.
And when I hear perform, I also for me it makes sense in a way that I perform Dialogos in the same way that a surgeon performs surgery.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have a sense of maybe what you're trying to do, but there's an art to it as well. You don't know where it's going to go. Yeah. And you have to be somewhat theatrical in the way that, as I was talking to Michelle earlier, like a shaman is theatrical in costume and song and dance and using different props and so on. Like that's just the reality we live in. Theater, poetry, all of these things are realer than real. So it's not like there's a true like non-performative, non-theatrical Daniel that if we could just get rid of all of the showmanship, then we'd have the true thing.
Right.
That is the true thing.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I'll just speak. I think basically what we're seeing in the liminal web is a kind of return to the salon, a return to the Scottish Enlightenment bar. You can read Randall Collins, the sociological theory of intellectual change, and kind of the Bloomsbury group, and the kind of basically gatherings primarily based on dialogue. I mean, basically, Virginia Woolf sitting around with Keynes, what are they doing? They're talking. That's the primary thing they're doing. What is Adam Smith and Hume? Talking. What is the Greek philosophers doing? Talking. That is the prime activity. And there is an art to talking. There's a performance to talking. There's a full life. When a human lives a full life, they seem like more like someone performing a work of art than just living out a daily routine. Like the line between someone who's just like a daily life and someone who's in a performance of art becomes very blurred. Like when the closer a human approaches to being fully human, the more they seem like they're engaging in a work of art all the time, because they are, because life becomes that art. And when you go back to like you're saying Tolstoy or the salon, that's how they lived. Like, it's like, we're entertaining, we're performing, we're going to show people that we're capable of bringing, we are culture. We bring forth culture in how we talk and perform. The problem is our metaphors are always conditioned by the historic moment, and we can't think of performance and acting today like they did back then, because we have the invention of the TV, the invention of the movie, the invention of where acting is a job that you get paid for, and you act a role for a movie script that has nothing to do with who you are. Like, there's no necessary relation between Tom Hanks and, say, Forrest Gump, right? Because it's a role that you do for a movie that you're getting paid for, and it's your job. So then when you think about acting and performance, you think about that, and you think of it scripted and ergo fake. Before the movie, then the notion of like a role or a performance or an oratory performance merely being something that has nothing to do with who you actually are, being a character, like someone independent of you, that's not a category. They do absolutely have Shakespeare plays. There are plays, but a play is something that an actor is doing, and they're doing a performance, and people would clap, and it would be marvelous, and it would be wonderful. And then very often these plays, like, they don't have secret celebrity lives. That's the other thing. Most of our actors are now celebrities, so they kind of have a dual life. There's like a double life. There's like a hidden life behind different things. But you probably know the actors in the Shakespeare's play. You've probably seen them. You can meet them. They're not like celebrities, right? So what's happened, there's a few things. So in the past, when there were actors, they weren't celebrities, so they didn't have a secret life that was kept from the presses that the paparazzi are trying to get to or something, right? And so then acting was not a veil. Like, acting was splendid. Acting was a well done skill. It was a great thing, and there was no like secret life that acting was hiding. Now, when we think about acting and performance and this whole idea of like Dialogos as performance, it's hard for us not to metaphorically associate that with the celebrity who's hiding from the paparazzi, or who's hiding something from the presses, or is very divided from the characters on their movies. And so that leads us to being very suspicious and associating performance with a kind of fakeness and a kind of hiddenness. Whereas in the past, when you didn't have TV, the notion of gathering people at the bar or the diner saloon and you're giving an oratory performance, that was to do something splendid. That was to do something artful. That was to do something magnificent, not to do something that's concealing a truth. In fact, the performance was bringing out the truth of what humans are capable. It was bringing out the power of rhetoric. It was bringing forth the fullness of being, that in order to bring forth that fullness of being, you had to be able to entertain. You had to be able to rise to the occasion, just like an athlete. What does an athlete do when they go to the court? What's the language we say? The athlete performed well. They did a good job. Were they fake? Is LeBron James fake when he performs? Right. No. What does that even mean? He's excellent when he performs. We say, wow, he performed well. We expect LeBron James to perform because they're on the court. We expect him to act different on the court than he would when he's like going to a restaurant, right? We expect a performance. That's why we're there. The issue is the term performance, when applied to Dialogos, is something more like LeBron James than it is Tom Cruise. It's something more of an athletic, like the oration culture, the rhetoric culture, the discussion, the entertaining culture. That was more of like an athletic thing, an athletic performance, an excellence performance. Or because of Van Gogh, what a Van Gogh does is something like a LeBron or a Kobe or a Michael or an MJ is doing. They're the performance. They're carrying out in the muse, and boom, now we have Starry Night. Oh my gosh, they performed. They did it. Likewise, when LeBron James, oh my gosh, he scored the point. Well, likewise, when Abraham Lincoln gives some great oration, or one of the spokesmen, Winston Churchill's like, oh my gosh, they did it. They did it. They performed. And in that performance, some sort of quality of life came out that doesn't come out unless you do that performance. Is that fake? Or is that...
It's realer than real.
Or is it realer than real?
Yeah.
And the intuitions that people have that there's a need for reality, with the dark renaissance, that's exactly right. The question is, what is that reality that you want? Yes. Is it the harshness that you want? Well, the reason you want the harshness is because in order for Van Gogh to paint Starry Night, there's a certain harshness. For Kobe Bryant to be able to perform, he has to go through the harshness of practice.
Yeah.
But the harshness is in service of the performance that brings forth the realer than real. And so that's what we have to figure out. How do we have the real be in service of Dialogos so that it brings out the realer than real? Because if we don't figure it out, then there's a bomb ticking in the background.
The excellence that you're seeking is not necessarily what's being arrived at when we just throw out the disruptive energies and bring those in. Like, nah, now it's real. And there's a quote from something Christopher Mastro Pietro said to me a couple of years ago that stuck with me. He said, we don't speak the truth, we perform it.
Yeah.
That was just one of those ones that has shone out, and it feels like you've explicated that here today. It's like you need to actually give life to what you're saying. You need to perform it in order to meaningfully communicate it. To simply say it is not sufficient, and to be someone who's bearing witness to the fullness of life and also communicating it, you need to be able to perform it.
Yes.
And that requires the performance of a lifetime.
Yes.
And it seems to me like the summit of whatever artful community we're participating in is more people being able to do that.
Yes.
Because that is both the thing that communicates and emanates the real, but it's also the thing in itself. Like, when you're really with that, you don't need television. It's not to get somewhere else. It's direct participation for yourself and for the ones who witness it.
I think that's exactly right. And I think the reason why the disruption, the impulse of a need of disruption, some kind of disruptive energy is valid is because how do you know it's life if it can't keep living once you try to disrupt it? Life is a thing that keeps going after the disruption. So if there is no disruption, then there's always the question of, is it real? But the question is, what is the integration? What is the role of the disruption? And I think that the place of the disruption is the work to condition oneself to be the performance and the showing of the realer of the real. Because then you have to come to terms with your dark shadow. You have to come to terms with reality. You have to allow yourself to take risks, to think thoughts, and to engage in philosophical thinking that everyone's like, why are you wasting your time doing that? Like, why are you even doing that? Does it pay? Does it make a job? There's all these. The world is trying to disrupt Dialogos. The economy is trying to disrupt Dialogos. Everything is trying to disrupt the liminal web. There's plenty of disruption for the liminal web. The issue is that the people on the liminal web need to be in their lived experience and lived lives dealing with those real disruptions and not running from them and using the liminal web to run from it. And only people can know if they're doing that or not, right. And then there has to be a certain trust of if that is occurring or not. And the disruption is like the practice where the basketball player goes to practice and, gains the ability to then perform on the court. Because I don't think you can have that bringing forth of the realer than real unless someone has experienced the kind of grittiness of reality. There's something about the grit of reality that is precisely what makes possible the bringing forth of the real. So the impulse for the disruption, the intuition that the disruption is needed is good, but the question is how it needs to be engaged in.
Right.
And I think, like you were saying, the private exchanges, the in-person, the art, the thinking in terms of wit, and then I would just say it's so important to get out of our heads an association of performance with fakeness, like that is getting in the way, because if you have that nervousness, oh, what if this whole like Dialogos or these liminal web conversations are fake? Well, then the realer of the real can't come forth, because there's a nervousness, there's a holding back, because you're like, maybe this isn't real. No, the realer of the real, it can only come forth with a full giving over to it. So once you see that, no, actually, an extraordinary oration or rhetoric or dialogue is a pinnacle human accomplishment, like that you could argue that before the TV, that was what like culture and community was centered on. Like, you can even look at these John Edwards sermons that are going on for 3 hours, like great speech, great presentation. These were the centers of social life. These were like the centers of social life. And therefore the liminal web in a way is just a return. It's not like it's something new, but it's in that newness a recovery of a very, very, very old tradition. And because it's an old tradition, it has roots. If we own that tradition and we don't think it's a performative fakeness, if we see it instead as a fittedness and participation at human excellence, well, then we will own the practice and we'll get better at it. And more people will get better at it. And then you'll have more people bringing to the table that excellence that will then make it more and more wonderful, beautiful, good, and true. And I think that's very important, given how it can then give people who experience it a different quality of life that changes how they carry themselves in the world, which if more people carried themselves in the world like that, then perhaps it would be easier to feel and experience that love that moves the sun and other stars. That I do think if humans learn to participate in, then indeed the average human life suddenly seems to be more of someone participating and being a work of art than it is just getting through the day. But I suppose it's probably 1 a.m. now. Well, Jacob, Kishere, thank you for being here in person.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
It's a delight.
Delight and honor.
Thank you for that wonderful Seneca-esque speech to close us out, and really just appreciate how you always show me more about history and rooting these things in history in ways that I can't expect or foresee. So, very much appreciated.
Well, we appreciate you, Jacob. Thank you. For more by Jacob Kishere, see SENSESPACE, see the house, see the podcast, see his work. We've really enjoyed having him, and it's really been a delight, and we appreciate your work and your presence, atmosphere, and for being who you are.
Thank you. Find me also at Culturepilgrim.
Bam. He's definitely a pilgrim for culture coming here with the Garner children.
Oh yeah.
That's definitely a culture shock. Different things. Thank you, Jacob. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Thank you, Daniel.